Hello everyone and welcome to the last round game of the second Piatigorsky Cup between Boris, Spassky and Hein Dona, Johannes Hendrikus Dona, as we mentioned in the previous video. And a lot of you guys have said that obviously this is a known fact that he hates being called Hein. So I will also not call him that. I will refer to him as Dona. And Spassky needs to beat him to win the tournament. If you haven't seen my previous video, Bobby Fischer faced the reigning world champion Tigran Petrosyan. However, he could only manage a draw with the black pieces. Who could manage more against the Iron Tigran? Pushing for a win with white would be difficult. Push for a win with black when Tigran is not interested in playing, in continuing the game, that is simply not a possibility. And that means that should Spassky win this game, he wins the entire event, the second Piatigorsky Cup of 1966. So, we already mentioned that, Bobby Fischer completely went on a rampage in the second half of the tournament. Spassky's been taking it easy. After facing Dona in the first half of the tournament, which their game ended in a draw, Spassky drew all of his games except the one against Bent Larsen that he won with the white piece. It was a pretty brilliant win. Also, check it out if you haven't. I made a video on it for this event. That's pretty much it. If Spassky wins, he wins the tournament. If he draws, he's drawn with Fischer for second place. And if he loses, it is Bobby Fischer who wins sole first. So let's see what happens here. Boris with white opens with pawn to e4. Dona replies with e5. We have knight to f3, knight to c6, and bishop to b5. Doru Lopez is on the board. A6, bishop to a4, and knight to f6. And here we've had this position, I would say, more than 1,000 times already on the channel, and there are some moves that are pretty standard here. You could castle kingside, you could play pawn to d3, you could play pawn to d4, or you could play what Spassky plays in this position, and that is queen to e2. He is so-called his pet variation or his love, his early love, but the real idea behind it is to avoid the martial attack. Spassky playing the martial attack himself, and you've seen how fiercely he can play it, knew the destructive power of the opening and decided to avoid it completely by just playing queen to e2 in this position. And also, I think it's definitely the way to go if you want to force a win against Dona, because it allows black to play pretty much anything, it allows white to play pretty much anything, and it's probably impossible to prepare for. While it may not be as precise, engine-wise as some of the other lines, you can't. You just can't prepare against it. White can play literally whatever white wants here. So here, pawn to b5, bishop to b3, bishop to e7, and Spassky castles kingside. Dona also castles kingside, c3, and the immediate pawn to d5, much like you would have, for example, in a martial attack. But Spassky plays pawn to d3. Again, black has so many options here. You could go bishop to b7. You could go rook to e8. You could go pawn to a5. You could go bishop to e6. You could go pawn to d4, which was played in the game. So pretty much any move that you can think of here is a move, and that is exactly what d4 is. It's definitely a move. We have rook to d1 and now bishop to e6, and this position has never been reached again. And while I don't have the exact moment in the game where a completely new position was reached, it could very well be this bishop to e6 move. Spassky said after the game that it's not maybe the best idea for white. The better would be to just play bishop to b7, but okay. Spassky continues with knight b to d2. Even though he can double up the pawns right away, he decides to develop the knight first, saying that I don't really care if you capture here. If you capture here, my knight will recapture. I will have all of this incredible pressure against the d4 pawn. At some point, you will have to capture. I will recapture with the b pawn. My queen is already on e2, guarding the e4 pawn, so it's only a matter of time before I execute pawn to d4. And, knowing how to play these positions, this is an excellent position to have if you have to slow play this for a win. So after knight b to d2, Dona replies with rook to e8, and now probably thinking that if Spassky wanted to capture, he would have just captured, but no, now Spassky captures because the rook is not on the rook is on e8, and it will be in the way of your own pawns if you just opened up the position with the rook being on the semi-open f file. that would be very good for black. This way black will have to waste a move to activate that rook. So f captures on e6 and knight to b3, just putting pressure on d4. So d captures on c3, b captures, and bishop to d6. We have pawn to d4. Spassky has everything nicely set up, so he doesn't have to wait. He can execute it right away, and you could capture, for example, but then you don't really gain anything. Even knight b captures can be played. So it's a very, very interesting position where you could capture and then make white's center really, really strong, or you decide not to capture. But for example, just to give you an idea, let's say play queen to d7, already knight captures, queen captures, and pawn to e5 wins material for Spassky. So it's a very, very dangerous move. You constantly have to worry about this pawn to e5 push. So knight to d7 was played, adding more support to the e5 pawn, never having to worry about e5. But now Spassky plays bishop to g5, and the question is, do you block or do you move away with the queen? If you block with something like bishop to e7, then Spassky has a couple of very good options, but capturing on e7 could be the best one. For example, queen captures and pawn to a4, putting pressure on the b5 pawn. The queen on e2, as you can see, is excellently placed. And after b captures and rook captures, you will have constant pressure on the center and also on that a6 pawn. And if he captures on d4, let's say he captures, this will be a problem. You could play pawn to a5, it will be a long-term weakness. And even if you try to defend tactically with rook to b8, as the knight on b3 is undefended, you can still capture because the knight on c6 is also undefended. Something like captures, 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 and white will always be better here. White is up a pawn. White has a very, very strong initiative. These are the pawns are all alone, so you will be able to attack them. They're isolated, and all in all, it would be very, very difficult to hold this against Boris. So after bishop to g5, queen to c8 by d.o.o, and now Spassky goes pawn to c4. Now, if he wanted to continue playing this in a positional manner, he would probably bring the bishop to g3, just increase pressure on the center. But he, I guess, decided that now the queen being out of the picture, it's time to go after the black king. And he plays pawn to c4, which weakens d4, so I imagine, some of you even frown upon seeing this, but as you'll see, Spassky can make it work. Knight captures, knight b captures, we have e captures, and pawn to e5. Grabbing more space and shutting down the dark square bishop, and here we have bishop to f8. And here, probably in his calculations, Spassky disregarded bishop to b4, which would be the best way to play this, because Spassky wants to play rook captures on d4, and then he can easily activate the rook. But by playing bishop to b4, that is simply not an option, as rook captures would be met with bishop to c3. Maybe Spassky was planning on even sacrificing the exchange, but it's probably not the case. So bishop to b4 would be the strongest way to defend. d.o.o goes bishop to f8, because why not? It's also a very useful piece to have, adding more support to the black king. And now Spassky plays rook captures on d4. Knight captures also may be possible, but rook captures is definitely the way to go. And here pawn to c6. Hard to say why pawn to c6 and not pawn to c5. Yes, you do improve your b5 pawn, but your pieces are now really out of the game, and Spassky makes use of that. He shifts the rook into the attack, rook to h4, even though you could maybe play rook a to d1 first with the rook on d4, the rooks being doubled here. Just test out what black's reply would be. It's very hard to find a move for that knight. For example, you could go to c5, but best for black would be to go rook to a7. Spassky obviously thought that his initiative was enough here. And again, a problem for me is not having the clock times for the games. So, for all we know, one of them could be in serious time trouble. So, okay, bishop to e7, bishop captures on e7, rook captures, and now knight to g5. Here, Spassky, like we said, could continue the game in a more tactical way, and he could continue in a positional way. c5 here is a tremendously strong move. See, it's just tremendous, because it completely shuts down black's position. Without c5, this will be a permanent weakness. It's very difficult to develop, and also knight captures is impossible due to the simple queen to c2, attacking the knight and the h7 pawn. So c5 would be a beautiful move here, which is one of the reasons why I think maybe Spassky was low on time. But also maybe d.o.o was low on time and Spassky just didn't want to give him time by, you know, thinking about the position for unnecessarily long. So he goes knight g5, also very strong, attacks h7, also puts pressure on e6, and now pawn to h6. Asks, okay, what is the knight doing? The knight goes back to e4, and now queen to c7. Putting pressure on this e5 pawn, so of course knight to d6, and now rook to d8. Preparing to put pressure on that knight. Knight captures on e5 is the idea, and then after queen captures, you will be able to recapture the knight on d6. So here, rook to d1, of course Spassky will not allow this. Queen to b6, and now I guess the idea is to bring the rook to f8 and put pressure on that f2 pawn. And now you see why Spassky wasn't really hesitant capturing that pawn and doubling on the e file when the rook moved from the f file. You can see that with the rook on the f file, things would be very, very different. Rook h back to d4, blocking the black queen, and now you are ready to put some pressure on that rook on d8. Rook to f8, and now king to h1. Obviously, Spassky doesn't want queen captures on f2 to come with check, should it ever happen. And now, again, c5, a very, very interesting option here for black. If you play pawn to c5, then the rook can move, and while it is very nice, then you no longer have access to the f2 pawn. So probably why d.o.o decided against it. He played queen to c5, put pressure on the e5 pawn this way, but now Spassky defends with pawn to f4. We have knight to b6 and knight to e4, putting pressure on the black queen, and there is nothing more that you can do here. The queen has to move to a3, or you can go to b4, doesn't really matter, but then you invite the double attack on the knight and on the queen. And while you can go knight c4, I mean, it's a pretty terrible position. The queen comes to h5, and a similar attack will occur. So here, queen to a3 was played, avoiding the c5 discovery, but now the position is winning. The question is, what do you play here? That's the real question. What would you play here? You know, just you don't have to calculate. What does your intuition tell you to play here? Even calculate if you feel like it. You know, what would you play? So the cleanest way to win this is to attack the black queen and then shift the rook into the attack. Or, you know, depending on how black defends, will also depend on where you land. Or you could play queen to h5 immediately. And in the game, queen to g4 was played, which seems like it's the same thing as queen to h5, but it's not. Here, once black makes a move, the problem is after queen to g6, there's just not a good idea for black. King to h8 will be met with the immediate rook to d8, and you resign here. There's no way for you to hold. The rook also blocks the queen's defense of the rook on f8, and not a lot for you to do here. In the game, Spassky played queen to g4, which is very strong, just not as strong as you'll see right away. But in order to counter it, you have to find a brilliant defensive resource, king to h7, which stops queen to g6. I will show you. Because maybe Spassky calculated all of this, otherwise why would he go into this line? But you would have to find rook to d3 now, and after the queen moves, now you remaneuver. Queen h4 with tempo, and once the rook moves, and there is only one way to move the rook, and that is to d7, which seems impossible as it's attacked twice, but your back rank is weak, and you would get something like rook captures, knight captures. It's impossible to capture, but you can go knight g5 check, and then after the king moves, knight captures on e6. Everything is nicely defended, your position is much better, and you will be able to push this for a win. But, you know, you will still have to work very, very hard for your meal after this queen to g4 move. That's why queen to h5 is the much better option. If you go queen to h5, now you no longer have to worry about king to h7, as rook comes to d6, or the immediate knight g5 kicks the king back, and well, the king h7 resource just isn't there. So after queen a3, queen to g4 was played, and now d.o.o could have played this brilliant king to h7 defensive resource, but he just played b captures on c4, which makes sense. Of course, it does give you a defended pass pawn on c4, but now Spassky's position is winning tactically, and it doesn't really matter how you start. You could start with queen g6, you could give a knight f6 check, you could play rook to d8. These are all moves that you will need, and Well, unfortunately for Donna, it doesn't matter all that much in which move order you play them. So Spassky starts with knight f6 check. The g-pawn is pinned, so he has to move the king, and you cannot go to h7, as that's not allowed. Rook to d8, not threatening rook captures, and of course capturing doesn't go all that well for black, with the knight controlling g8 and h7 square. So rook to c7 is played. Interestingly, rook to f7 allows for you to defend, but then the problem is queen g6, and there's no defending this. If rook captures on f6, to kick away the knight, e captures. You don't even care about the rook here because this will be checkmate. And once you capture, then it's a nice queen captures. You have to defend the rook here. King g8, queen captures on e6, king h8, and now you can play a lot of moves, but this is the best one, cutting off the queen. And now once the queen tries to get back, now you again start checking captures. King g8, rook to g6 with check, and that's all there is to it. Rook g7, king e8, queen to e6 check, and only move is queen to e7, which will be met by queen captures or rook captures with a checkmate. So that's the problem of defending the rook this way. So Donna tried rook to c7, and now Spassky just goes queen to g6, and you fall apart. Not much you can do here. G captures was played, queen captures, and he was in this position on move 35 that Donna resigned the game. As there is nothing more to be done here. Once you move the king, probably here, as you also want to defend your rook, it's merely a matter of captures, and now the other rook wins the black queen, and that's it. It's completely pointless. Do you capture, or do you? If you capture, then captures also you will lose the rook. So maybe something like knight to d7, but yeah, it's just pointless. There's nothing you can do here. You will have to capture at some point, and well, black has some material, but not nearly enough to continue the game. How are you playing this? Again, you cannot capture. You will lose the rook on c7. You can move the rook to a7. Maybe try that way, but still okay. After captures, now there's no way to capture. If you capture, then the rook again falls. If you could somehow get a position where you have a rook and the knight with your king being safe, and also somehow you're escorting the passed c-pawn down the board, maybe it will be playable. But as it's not, after queen captures on f6, Donna resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here, which means that Spassky, as we said before the game, a win would allow him to win the tournament in sole first place. That is exactly what happened. Boris Spassky, 11.5 out of 18, with a brilliant tournament. The only player to go undefeated in the tournament. Even the great Tigran Petrosyan lost 3 games in this tournament. Fischer lost also 3 games. Larsen lost 5, but he also won 7, like Fischer. And yeah, it was a pretty crazy event. But Spassky, even though he drew the entire second half of the tournament pretty much with wins against the Bent and Donna here, it was enough to clinch first place. Bobby Fischer, 11 out of 18. Bent Larsen, 10 out of 18. Wolfgang Unzika and Lajos Portish, 9.5 out of 18. Samuel Reshevsky, 9. Tigran Petrosyan, 9. Miguel Najdorf, 8 out of 18. Borislav Ivkov, 6.5 out of 18. And Donna, last place with 6 out of 18. But even with last place, he played a crucial role in the tournament, losing to Spassky in the final round of the second Piatigorsky Cup of 1966. Yeah, really hope you enjoyed this short coverage of the second Piatigorsky Cup. There will be some honorable mentions, as some nice games were really played here, and I will cover them. But after that, we are going on to some other events, maybe some modern events. For those of you wondering about when is the next big saga coming, it is coming, just not yet. So you will have to wait a little bit longer. It's it takes a lot to prepare, and I want the timing to be just right. At the moment, I'm otherwise engaged, and I'm unable to fully commit to the big saga. But I will do it at some point. Shorter sagas until then, and following some modern events. But yeah, brilliant stuff by Spassky. He lost the World Chess Championship match. Or rather, he could not become the world champion in 1966, but he will become one in 1969, and well, that's That's nice, obviously. You know, it'd be a shame to come all that way and not become a world champion, but we know that's not the case, as we also know what happens next and what happens next and what happens next, and so on. So yeah, brilliant display of power by the future world champion Boris Spassky. I would like to thank David Gasparian, Ruhaho Hostetla, More Classical, Duncan Weinkoll, and Christopher Medema for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day. And today I'm also playing in the Croatian League, so wish me luck. See you soon.